America. My name is Osei-Frimpong. I come to you live every Monday and Thursday. Monday, I do a relationship show. Thursday, I do a more politics show. And today I'm going to try to mix the two and talk about reproductive lineage, as in what are we trying to do when we reproduce? And when I say reproduce ourselves, that means not necessarily what you think. And when I even say reproduce our kind, it doesn't necessarily mean what you think insofar as we're free, which means we're trying to reproduce free people as opposed to wolves, which aren't actually trying to reproduce anything, but in a way, nature kind of takes care of that by fixing the environment around them, and not only fixing the environment around them, but affixing them and their kids with kind of a developmental strategy so that they'll get claws and chompers and all of that stuff. So we're going to talk about what we are trying to do, especially free people. It gets even more tricky. What we are trying to do when we try to reproduce ourselves, and what it means to actually sustain a reproductive lineage. That means, as a free person, you want your children to be free. That doesn't necessarily mean you want them to be like you. And even if you're not free, you still want your children to be free, which is why, unlike animals, we can actually try to plan and hope and exercise plans so that our children are more free than we are. What does that mean? How does that work? I'm going to talk to you right after I hit the beat.
To the beat, y'all.
Yeah. Sound good to me. Never change the ways for the world or the government. If I was the president, then I would state facts. You leave it up to me, I paint the White House black and it can feature in your front.
To the beat, y'all.
So when we talk about reproductive lineage and our lineage and what we're trying to reproduce, it's not exactly clear what we're trying to do and how that separates us from, say, species. So when you think about species are just animals of a certain genus that can have sex with each other interchangeably and reproduce fertile offspring. That's a definition as old as Aristotle. It's kind of so-so, but it'll work as a kind of ground. So when species reproduce and sustain the species, that's what they're doing. When people reproduce and sustain what they are isn't necessarily a person as an animal. It is a particular kind of person. And more importantly, it is a free person, a self-determining person. So what we want to do as self-determining people is, and not even if we aren't self-determining people for either psychological or political conditions, we're not yet self-determining. We want in the future that our children be self-determining. That doesn't necessarily mean that they do the particular kind of thing that we do, but it means that because the particular kind of thing that we do might not actually be viable. If you made $1 million, if you made $1 zillion selling videotapes in the 70s, you don't want your kids to sell videotapes in the 70s, although that's the way you particularized yourself and secured your nut. You want your kids doing something else that's more appropriate to the moment. So in order to be free, and you want your kids to be free and want that to be your lineage, what you bequeath to them, you're preparing them in order to particularize themselves in a way that, to particularize themselves as both their jobs and their families and their political affiliations and all of that in a way that actually promotes their self-determination. And you want to prepare them to actually be able to particularize themselves in a way that the world itself upholds them promoting their self-determination, and in a way that also promotes the world's self-determination. And that's different from animals who don't have to think about this stuff nearly as much because, one, they don't have the capacity. Two, nature particularizes them astutely. But as parents know, and children I think know too, there's no destiny in the same way. The world, unlike the natural world, the world given in abstract nature, this world is made up of other people who might change their minds about the laws, whereas nature is fixed, the wolf in the savannah or the lion in the savannah such that the laws of the jungle won't really change in the same way. So we have to take responsibility for sustaining our laws in the way that natural animals don't. We have to take responsibility. Part of our particularizing ourselves has to be also sustaining the environment that allows us to, be the self-determining person we are and serve society in the way that actually will promote both our freedom and the sustenance of society, our political community. So it's a different kind of reproductive lineage because nature doesn't do as much of the work both in sustaining the environment and in governing the actions. Right? And parents who don't take this seriously have a hard time understanding why their kids can't have a hard time turning freedom into meaning. But my kids, this is how I talk to them, so they actually have a pretty good way of turning freedom into meaning, or way to think about how to turn freedom into meaning, as opposed to just thinking about freedom as a sort of license to go on your strongest desire. Because a lot of parents, especially the bad ones, just want their kids to be happy. And you know what that ends up in? And then they're surprised when that ends up with drugs. Because they just wanted their kids to be happy. I want my kids to be free, which means that there's going to be an internal constraint on what they can do. It's not going to be their strongest desire, because their desire might be for drugs. But that is not in principle with their will. So what's the argument for all of this? Let me back up and give you the argument for all of this. So we have all these natural desires that, one, keep us alive, and two, don't really determine us, because we could choose between which one of them. And so far as we have a free will, we can choose which one we should do. But we don't really have a measure on which desire we should choose, because they're all kind of contingent, and they're all kind of arbitrary, and they're all in a way given to us, so they're alienating. And so all of these natural desires we have as received from nature, we'll talk about the ones we receive from our parents and society and afterwards. But all of these natural desires we receive from nature, even if we choose them freely, what we're choosing, the object, is something that's external to us and given to us. So we're choosing our way into alienation. When I talk to students about choosing their way into alienation, I mentioned the 2016 election where you had to choose from Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And that was I think that's a pretty clear, explicit expression of people choosing their way into their alienation. It's kind of felt bad, whichever they chose. Or a vegetarian who has to choose between chicken, fish, and beef. And they're choosing their way into an alienation. They're free to choose any one, but the object of their choice isn't itself freedom. So that's isn't itself like representative of themselves as free people. So that's going to be a problem. So in order for people to be happy and free, they can't just choose the most pleasurable desire insofar as the most pleasurable desire is alien from them. And they can't even rank them in order of some sort of pleasure, because that's still choosing on a principle that's alien to what the free will is as free. They have to choose based on how the desire enables freedom. So that way you're choosing yourself, and you're choosing your own, the object of your choice is the way of choosing is also the object of your choice. So you're choosing yourself in truth, and you're determining yourself. It's not something else that's determining what you choose. Because once again, if we're just choosing for pleasure, it could be drugs, it could be all sorts of kind of debaucherous things that are alien and marketed to us that don't really reflect who we are as free people and who we are as our own autonomous being. By the way, if you appreciate me talking like this, which I think you should, go to www.funkyacademic.com, kick in $5, $15, $50 a month, and I'll keep doing what I'm doing on Monday and Thursday. And I think you should definitely kick in, because would you believe, after my show on anti-Semitism, I lost a lot of Jews. And after my show in defense of cultural misogyny, which I think womanhood has a problem, a historical problem that we could cleanse and purify womanhood to a better womanhood that actually holds women accountable, which would be fantastic as a culture. And I go into the arguments on that show, but I lost a lot of women. And I suspect some male feminists, who knows? But I lost a lot of women and guys who want to appeal to a certain sort of women. But I still think it's right, and I think the arguments are good. So go to that show, read the show, and also go to www.funkyacademic.com and kick in $5, $15, or $50, and I'll keep doing what I'm doing. So what are you trying to do when you try to reproduce a free person? You're trying to reproduce a person who evaluates their own desires based on how those desires realize freedom. And also, it's going to be something that's a subjective condition. There's an objective condition. Is they have to realize freedom in a way that can be itself universalized and allow other people to realize freedom. But they're going to have to pick a particular desire. They're going to have to pick a particular desire. People who treat kids and tell kids that they don't have to particularize, I don't think do a service to too many people. You're going to have to particularize. You just don't have to particularize in the way that I happen to particularize. I want you to particularize in the way that society deems appropriate and will uphold, or you fashion society so that it will uphold the way you particularize. But you're going to have to do a particular thing and not other thing. So just because freedom entails universality doesn't mean that it's realized as a universality. It's realized as a particular way of being, a particular action. You're not free when you do nothing just because you could possibly do everything. You know, when you're actualized, it's because you've particularized, you've actually done something, but you've done it in a way that actually affirms yourself as free. And it's done it in a world that upholds it as free. And you've done it in a way that's like, so you're not a drug dealer, you're not an arms dealer, you're not some sort of predator. Your form of freedom actually sustains society in a way. So that's what you want for your kids. You don't want your kids to necessarily do what you do. You want them to be free, which means not be a slave to their natural or given desires, or even socially imposed or marketed desires. You want them to, but also you want them to particularize themselves and realize their desires in a way that is upheld by the world, which is going to be part of the way that they conduct themselves and the way the world has to conduct themselves. Because the human world isn't fixed by natural laws in the same way we make our laws artificially and usually with lots of long meetings. And people get this wrong, so they preach subjective freedom to their kids, and then they're surprised when their kids can't actually uphold any one objective institutions, right? Their kids end up divorced or bad parents or have a hard time working a job or politically irresponsible, but they are subjectively free in a way that they just kind of do whatever they want, whatever makes them feel like it's themselves. There's no check that curtails their appetite, as it were, because they feel like their appetite comes from themselves and they should be able to do what they want. And they learn that because you told them that and you were ignorant. You didn't really take what I had to say seriously, or you didn't know. But now I'm telling you, when you raise your kids, and if you're raising them to be free, which I think you should, you have to actually give them a robust understanding of what freedom means. Not just acting on the strongest desire because they want to. That desire has to be kind of purified through reflection about how that desire enables freedom, the principle of the will that actually is realized. That's what separates us from, the more brute animals. And then think about that, what they actually do, not just in their own internal, purifying their own internal desires, but they actually have to think about the world and how what they've done actually can be upheld by the world in realizing freedom for both themselves and other people in the world, right? But it's going to be a particular desire, because when you live, you don't live as everything, you live as a particular kind of thing. Now, I don't necessarily want my students to be philosophers / YouTubers. I don't want them to realize my particular identity in that way, but I do want them to be free. And that means I don't want them to be scared of Jews or women and be able to say their truth as they get older. Or, I want them to be able to say their truth all the time, but especially as they get older. The number of grown people low-key scared of both women and Jews is really unfortunate. And there are women and Jews who are scared of women and Jews. So, it's not as if you know what I'm talking about. So I'm just not one of them, and I'm modeling what it looks like to be not one of them. By the way, someone called me in the comments an educated lame, and I find that a fascinating title that I agree with. Insofar as I think if I had another podcast, I think I'd call it the educated lame. As I am, I think that's appropriate. I think that's appropriate. That's not a bad way to be. My family's dope. I got a pretty nice house. Like my life's good, and yeah, and I think I try to make educated lame looks good. And I want to help. More importantly, I want to help you guys just be better with your politics and be better with your, your families, and to kind of make sense of the world. So when animals reproduce, they reproduce their kind. Our kind is free. So when we reproduce, we don't reproduce our particular kind. We don't reproduce in the particularity. We produce in the particularity that's actually a realization of a universal, since freedom means that, you could kind of take on any particularity. So I do not, as, a philosopher / YouTube guy, do not want to reproduce philosophers / YouTube guys. I want to reproduce free people. It just so happens that if you want to be a philosopher / YouTube person, I think the world needs more of them. Maybe more philosophers, less YouTube people, I don't know. But I want to reproduce, as part of my lineage, free people, and people who understand what it means to be free and can realize that in their world, and can both adjudicate their own internal desires, subjective desires, but also the objective conditions in the world in terms of freedom. Right? And I want people to be able to do that. So that's going to be my lineage and legacy. And that's what I want to pass on to my kids. So a lot of people think, well, you want to pass on money and you want to pass on maybe a job. And that's a particularization of freedom insofar as, money lets you buy things, and the jobs are stable ways to buy things and to be recognized by societies. But more importantly than that, or maybe undergirding that, is what you want to pass on to your children is freedom. And how that's realized and particularized has to be, in a way, up to them. But you have to prepare them, which is actually substantive. I'm pretty hard on my kids, as you can imagine, but the dope kids is up to you to prepare them to actually be able to choose responsibly. That's why they're in your care until that for so long. All right, so I hope this has been clear about what you're trying to reproduce when you're trying to say reproduce free. You're trying to reproduce free kids, and let that be your legacy. But when I mean free, I mean people who are able to participate in certain institutions of freedom. That means trying to reproduce good parents, trying to reproduce good, participants in civil society, either as workers or as owners, whatever. And then you're trying to reproduce people who are good at political actors and responsible moral agents and good owners of property and all of that stuff. You're trying to reproduce that. Now, they don't have to do it in the particular way that you do it, but they should do it in a way that's both subjectively and objectively free. Subjectively free insofar as they've purified their own desires for, like, things that aren't particularly good or healthy or will enslave them. So they aren't going to chase the strongest desire, because the strongest desire might be for something that enslaves them. But they'll also even particularize themselves. That means act in a certain way and not other ways, that particularize themselves objectively, so that how they do it is healthy for society. So you don't want, people don't want their kids to be arms dealers. People don't want their kids to be rich drug dealers. If you do, you're a bad parent. Like, you want your kid to be able to earn an honest living. That means contribute to society in a way that enables and is a credit to society, but also, allows them to do their subjective desires, as long as their subjective desires are realized by themselves and not just implanted in them by marketing without any sort of conceptual grounding. Anybody who says, well, I just want my kid to be rich, well, and then anybody who says, I just want my kid to be happy, and then are surprised when their kid has a hard time sustaining meaningful relationships, and even ends up divorced. I don't want my kids divorced. I don't want my kids I want my kids to be able to sustain happy partnerships. I want my kids to be able to sustain good ways of life in society, and I want my kids to sustain good politics. I don't want to have to disown my kids because they have bad politics, bad jobs, and are bad at family. I don't care how rich they are. I don't care how independent they are. I don't care how happy they are. if they have bad jobs, bad family, and if they have awful jobs, even if they're subjectively, like, even if they get paid doing, like, awful work, I would feel bad as a parent. I'd feel like I'd sort of failed. Same if my kids end up, divorced and screwing up or making bad choices with respect to partners. And I'm going to tell them with respect to their partner, like, who they should choose and who they shouldn't and why. And I'd be bad and I'd feel bad if they can't actually, like, listen to arguments and evaluate them fairly. So I feel like I would have failed as a parent. You have a lot of control as a parent. A lot of parents, especially liberals, don't take ownership of the amount of control that they have of their child, so they just kind of let the market raise their child. They abandon them to civil society, and they're surprised when their child is kind of a commercial mercenary. And then, yeah, if my child has bad politics, it's because I failed as a parent, right? So in all of these ways, I want them to be free, but I want them to be free in a way both subjectively and objectively, which means that their freedom is going to have content. That's what I'm trying to reproduce as a person. As a person. I'm not a wolf naturally reproducing wolves. I'm a person naturally reproducing persons, and persons are characterized by their self-determination, and self-determination is realized through certain sorts of relationships. So if you can't sustain relationships, then I have not actually, a certain sort of relationships, I have not actually succeeded in creating a free person. So I've failed in reproducing what I ought to reproduce, which isn't my particular kind of philosopher YouTuber. It's a free person. All right, I hope this has been clear. And if you appreciate what I do, which I think you should, go to www.funkyacademic.com and kick in $5, $15, or $50, because I'm giving you a quality of wisdom that you're not going to get every day on NPR or anywhere else. But I think it's important. All right, thank you for your time. Peace.